And I'd like to introduce our illustrious president, Cathy Bloomfield. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Sarah, did you have a question? Okay. Good morning and good afternoon and maybe good evening to those of you. I don't know what time it is where you are, Alba, but so happy to have you with us today. I want to welcome you to another one of our AJL Presents events. This is one of our open events. We welcome visitors to these AJL events, unlike our roundtables, which are for members only. So I want to welcome those who are members and those who are yet to be our members.
Oh, hold on, Cathy, you got muted.
Oh,
sorry.
Who muted me?
me?
You muted me. I don't know where I left off. Anyway, we hope that you'll consider joining us as we have a number of wonderful things planned for the rest of the year, and we have our conference upcoming in June. I will post the link to our membership joining page for those of you who are not members, so you can consider being one of us. I want to take a few minutes. It's my pleasure to introduce Rachel Kamin, who's going to be our moderator today, our illustrious moderator today. Rachel has been the synagogue librarian for over 20 years and is currently the director of the Joseph and May Gray Cultural and Learning Center of North Suburban Synagogue Bethel in Highland Park, Illinois. She serves on the AJL's New Jewish Fiction Award Committee and contributes articles and book reviews to Book Links, School Library Journal, Jewish Book World, Judaica Librarianship, Library Journal, and AJL Reviews. She facilitates book discussions admirably, I will add, for 5 Chicago area synagogues, as well as for other organizations and private groups. Rachel holds a BA in history from Grinnell College and a master's degree in library and information science from the University of Michigan. I know that Rachel is going to do an outstanding job, and later on in this session, the author of the Book of the will be joining us for some time to answer your questions. So Rachel, it's up to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, Cathy. It's great to be here and see so many familiar faces and new faces. So yes, as Cathy mentioned, Anna Solomon is going to log on. We had targeted 11:45 Central, 12:45 Eastern. She may be running a little late. I told her not to stress because there's so much to talk about with this book. So we will just, continue our discussion. And when she pops in, Jackie will give us a little warning. So no one needs to be worried. If you say something critical, we don't like to say critical things necessarily in front of the author, but Jackie will give us a warning before she lets Anna in, so we can, quickly we'll wrap up our discussion and save your questions for Anna. I had the opportunity to be on a Zoom with her last week. She was absolutely fabulous. So we're really in for a treat. She's going to be great. So I'm not gonna, normally when I do book discussions, I give a bio of the author, I give some background on the book. We're gonna skip all that because we'll wait and we'll do that when Anna joins in. So we'll just dive right into the Book of Thee by Anna Solomon. And I also will say, I say this at all of my book groups, you can come to book club if you haven't read the book, and you can come to book club if you haven't finished the book, and you can come to book club if you didn't like the book. That's all fine, but we will spoil the ending. So this is a, spoiler alert, no holds barred, everyone, we can talk freely about the ending. So, if you haven't read the book, then just be warned that will spoil the ending. And also sometimes if you're having trouble with a book and you're not so into it, after a book discussion, you're more motivated to finish it, or you're like, yeah, I'm good, now I don't need to read it. So I know I did get some feedback for some readers that they didn't love this book, so don't worry if you're one of them. Okay, so I'm trying, okay, great. I'd rather be on gallery view. It is a little hard to have a discussion with 65 people. This is so fabulous, but we're gonna try. So you're on 3 of my screens, so I'll try to keep toggling back to see people. But, feel free, don't be shy. I know it's a little hard and awkward on Zoom, but you could either use the raise hand, like little icon, or you can just actually raise your hand, or just kind of unmute yourself and, try to interject, because I do want this to be participatory and discussion. So let's start. We've got a 2016 Brooklynite, a 1970s senator's wife, and an ancient Jewish heroine. What do these three women have in common? Who wants to kind of give us a little, like, the three protagonists, Lily, V, and Esther? How are they similar? How are they different? If we were like making a list on a whiteboard, what are some similarities? I guess we can start with the similarities. What are the similarities in these between these women? What's connecting them? Yeah, Arlene, go for it.
In all fairness, we hosted Anna yesterday at my synagogue. So I don't want to
You've got insider information. Great.
No, but actually, having read the book, I would say that all of these characters are really connected by events concerning the men in their lives and how they were forced to do things, make decisions based on that relationship. So I think the men in their lives and the choices they had to make kind of tied together who they really emerged as.
Great. And we'll talk about, if we have time, hopefully we'll talk about the marriages portrayed and the husbands in the book. Okay, great observation, Arlene. Other things that connect these women across the generations, things they have in common. Anyone else want to pop in? I had marked one thing, Esther and Lily are both second wives.
Mm-hmm.
So the theme of second wives plays a role. Yeah, Jackie.
And they both had a lot of timidity in the beginning. They hadn't found their voice.
They hadn't found their voice. Okay, good point. Other thoughts? The other page that I marked, 76, 79, which is where it's the how Adam got Lily for a wife story. This is also with the kind of the similarities between Esther and Lily, right? She says Lily had, I guess they kind of played this game because his name was Adam, and they thought, well, she's kind of like his Eve. But she says Lily had never been Eve, not even for a second. She had entered as Esther in her plain hat, like the plain ribbons, and stayed Esther, the second wife. So that was another thing I wrote about the second wife. Did anyone relate to one of these women more than the others, or like one of these characters more than the other? Oh, Barbara put in the chat, both Esther and V are orphans. And then later, Lily also, remember, Lily had lost her father, before the story started, and then loses her mother. So actually all three of them end up as orphans. Great observation, Barbara. Anyone like one of them more than the other? Anytime there's books that are structured in this way with the multiple narratives, sometimes as a reader, you're like, okay, yeah, I don't like this part. Let's get back to the character. Let's get back to the character I like. Did anyone have that experience with either of these three narratives that they were more compelled by one than the other? And
I hope if people haven't finished the book, I liked them a lot more at the end of the book than the beginning of the book. I thought Lily was whiny, and by the end of the book, I liked all of them. But it took me, a while to get into some of them.
You had to warm up. Yeah, no, I don't think that's, I think that's common. Maybe some of us had that. Other reactions to these women, and like if you like them or related to them more, or if you liked one narrative more than the other. Yeah, Arlene.
Oh, I don't want to. Okay. I don't know. I kind of found V to be very, very interesting. Obviously, she turns out to be the real V, but I just think her character, the whole evolution of her character from the very beginning up until the end, and all the things that she revealed, and the story she told, it was really quite remarkable. I really liked her, especially at the end, when she's sitting in the back of the spiel there, and look, it was really, I I don't know. I just, she was so into, was so much there. There was so much, development of her, in the book, I think, and she was a rich character. And
I think you're right. And I think you're right that she probably changed and evolved the most out of any of the characters. Because like Vanessa too, our perception of her at the beginning was very different, I think, than our perception of her.
She was also, I think she was also fairly honest with herself about who she is, what she's capable of. And, she didn't start out that way. So she came to know herself, I think, in the end, kind of.
Yeah, no, agreed. And also that was very young at the beginning. I think that's something that you kind of forget. And then you're like, oh, she's like 24. I mean, that we meet her when she's very young. Whereas with Lily, we're meeting her, she's already in her 40s. With V, we're meeting her in her 20s. So there is a difference. One of the reviewers, this was Good Morning America, said, the reviewer wrote, I think a lot of readers will find some parts of themselves in this book, whether you relate most to the headstrong Esther, who does not want to become queen, to Vivian Barr, a senator's wife torn between following conventions and breaking free, or to Lily, a contemporary mother of two struggling to figure out what she even wants. You'll recognize and root for the characters in this book. So maybe not so much at the beginning, but at the end we're rooting for them. What about in terms of how the book was structured and the little threads, the gestures, the activities, the objects, the themes that seem to reappear when we're skipping across time and going back and forth between those characters? I kind of made a running list. Yeah, Ellen Cole.
I was going to say, they do bring things up, some of them awkwardly, so that the women are connected by humming or sewing or wearing robes or kissing men in the kitchen. There is a pattern. But I want to kind of ask you a question. You said something about the structure. On your list, you had close reads called The Hours. And this, I don't know, maybe most of you saw it. It was a wonderful movie with Nicole Kidman. I think she won the Oscar for playing the role. But because the author specifically mentions it in the book, I went back and grabbed my copy. And so here's my thought. The book, as opposed to the movie, has a structure that Solomon has copied. But if you read the three women in the Hours, they're divided into the author, the reader, and the character. And so my question to you is, if you look at the three women in the book of V, who do you see as the author, the reader, and the character?
That's a great question, Ellen. I think we should save it too for Anna Solomon to answer.
Okay. I mean, I started with one idea and changed it by the end.
Okay, well, you can share. What do you think? And I have not read The Hours, but I did put it on that read alike list, because if you made it in interviews, she mentions it, and also in the acknowledgement, she's not hiding the fact that she was inspired by how Michael Cunningham structured that.
Okay, so
Ellen, what's your theory? And then we'll ask Anna Solomon, and we'll see if she agrees with you.
I'm going to say that the author is Vashti. The character is Esther. And who was the third one? The reader is definitely Lily.
Okay. Anyone else want to take a stab at Ellen's question? Or we can wait and Ellen will ask Anna for her thoughts on that. And if anyone else has read The Hours and made the connection even before, Anna, before you realized that Anna had done that. And Jackie put that list again. Jackie posted a link in the chat. That's my reading list. Great. Oh, Marcy put in laundry. Yes, there's laundry in the book. That is a theme. So yeah, Ellen mentioned humming and sewing and, kissing in the kitchen, laundry, as we said, second wives, parties. There are parties in the book, the women, the female communities, right? Like we've got the harem
Yeah,
in the Esther,
exactly.
and then we have the conscious raising groups, and you have the sewing circle in 2016, you know, and some form of sexual assault, unfortunately, yes, and sexuality is a common thread throughout. And Rita comments, the laundry always seems to be the problem, unfinished. Yeah, I felt for Lily, like with the laundry in the basement of the building and always forgetting it. I mean, I related. Your heart, you felt for her that, you know, the super was going to leave the wet laundry at the door and feeling like she failed as a stay-at-home mom because she couldn't do the one thing that, you know, was on her to-do list. The other thing that plays a role throughout all three narratives, I think, is masks and makeup and costumes. Anyone want to take a stab at what role masks, makeup, costumes play in this novel as we're, you know, getting ready for Purim? Those play an important role in the Purim celebration too.
So masks allow you to conceal what you're really feeling inside. And women were expected, you know, especially, except for Lily, who's the most contemporary, they were supposed to sublimate, not express what they were really feeling. Yes, I'm being dutiful, except for Vashti and Vanessa.
Yeah. Ellen, go for it.
I have a question about the masks. To go back to the makeup and all of this, this is specifically spelled out in the biblical book of Esther. You know, we don't pay much attention to the details in the beginning because we're getting on to Mordecai and Haman and the political stuff. But most of what goes on in the book is actually specifically written down in the book of Esther. And by the way, I read 3 translations to see if maybe somebody was adding things we didn't know about. So I know that some of the reviewers talked about masks too. I have to be honest, I don't remember masks actually coming into the novel.
Well, I think the one quote that I wrote down was page 247. When Lily is talking to Vivian, Vivian tells Lily, Ruth, her mother, Rosemary/Ruth, was a private person, your mother. She was the kind of private person who wears a face that makes her seem like a public person.
Makes her
Maybe
seem
not
like
the
what?
word, a public person.
Oh.
She wears a face that makes her seem like a public person. And you're right, the reviewer from the Washington Post said, masks serve a purpose, protecting the vulnerable self from the outside world. Ruth, Lily's mother, a central figure around whom much of the plot twist is. And then they reference that quote. These self-preserving measures frustrate, rendering women inscrutable, their capabilities a threat. And I also, the other quote I marked down from Ruth, she told Lily, there's no shame in Vashti, Lily. I think, one of Lily's daughters wanted to dress up as Vashti, and Lily was trying to to persuade her not to. And Ruth said, there's no shame in Vashti, Lily. Didn't I teach you that? It's all the same costume anyway. Some old scarves, a little thrift store jewelry. And then Lily comments that this is what men hate about women. Lily thinks that we are actors, that between our urges and our actions, there are these layers, these angling and scrim. So, and the other thing too, and she mentioned, the other thing I want to ask as librarians is like, what, Anna Solomon talks about the book of Esther that her children were like fixated on, that she couldn't stand to read. I was like, which version? Which PJ Library Esther book are you talking about, right? But I think she said that idea of like Esther, of us glorifying Esther. Oh, she was a natural beauty. She was so plain and she was so beautiful even without all the makeup. But, Anna Solomon interprets that as she was doing that on purpose so that she wouldn't get chosen. She was consciously not making herself beautiful so that she wouldn't be chosen. So that was interesting. Yeah, Carol Lipson.
Well, I think that now that you've raised the original Purim story, that's the elephant in the room all the way through the book. Each of the women character and how they relate to that original story, and the ways that Anna Solomon herself changes the story. She's writing her own midrash.
Yes.
And using some of what appears in other midrashim and making up stuff.
Yeah,
And
making up stuff
creating her own.
because it's fiction.
And all three of the women in some ways relate to that story.
To that story and how they heard it. I mean, I think also like storytelling is a big part of a theme in the novel, right? Like how this story impacts across generations and how the story gets retold, you know, is Lily retelling the story differently to her daughters than she heard it, you know, as a child. And speaking of the Megillah, let's get to the, like, one of the, maybe the central events in this book for sure is when in the 1970s portion, when Vivian Barr refuses her husband's request at that party. Did you find that plot line improbable, unbelievable, shocking? You know, how did you relate to that? You know, what was your initial reaction to that plot line that she did? And, you know, and did it change through the course of the novel? Yeah, Ellen.
Well, first of all, it's set in an era where, you know, one of the major words in everybody's vocabulary was cover up. It was Nixon and Watergate. So we're talking about cover up and uncover. There is also a very strong political reason behind what the senator is doing. They also lead you to believe that he had kind of a coarse background, so maybe he went to burlesque houses and this wasn't such a big deal. In the Bible story, they each give parties for their own, so that followed. So I think it might have been shocking and maybe unrealistic, but I think it held water.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, obviously most of us as readers knew, it's page 140, 141 too is what I marked, but most of us knew, like, okay, we know what you're trying to do, Anna Solomon, you know, because we know the Vashti story, right? There's definitely a parallel. What the way she retells 140, 141, and then the way she retells it with Vashti in page 235, you know, Anna Solomon purposely like repeats almost the identical language. So like we know what she's doing, but yeah, I was kind of like, oh, come on, 1970s, that wasn't that long ago. Would this really have happened? And then I watched Mrs. America on Hulu, if anyone has seen that series. And I think it's the opening scene of the first episode where there is like Senator's wife beauty contest and Phyllis Schlafly is like parading across the stage in a bathing suit, right? And I was like, oh, maybe Anna Solomon's plot line there wasn't as far-fetched as I thought it was, because if the senators' wives had to parade across stages at benefits and fundraisers in their bathing suits, it's not such a huge leap that someone would have been asked to, you know, dance naked in front of the drunk friends. So we've got some chitter chatter in the chat about it being whether it's improbable or believable or not. The other quote that I marked was 288. The story doesn't have to be believable. It has to be the opposite. So unbelievable that they can believe in it. So far from what they know to be true that they can lose sight of the truth. And that was a quote in reference to the whole, you know, which we'll get to. I mean, that quote was not in reference to the Vashti dancing before the king story, but I thought it really relates that, you know, it kind of defends Anna Solomon's decision to put it in there. And also the, you know, it's just as outrageous as King Ahasuerus' demand of Vashti. Like, why are we saying that King Ahasuerus' demand of Vashti wasn't so outrageous? It was outrageous thousands of years ago, just like it's outrageous in the 1970s. Yeah, Kathy.
I have to say, I was like, when I read that part of the book, I was totally appalled. Like, how dare he? Who does he think he is? This is insane. And then I had to bring myself back and remember what year the book was set in, right? And I recognized that at that time, that would have been something that could have happened, that this guy could have had that feeling that I can ask my wife to do anything and she'll just obey me, right? I'm not sure that times have changed all that much, but somewhat, I think, I hope, I pray that at least women feel they have more of a voice. But then, we've had this Me Too movement going on for, a few years now. And I feel like, the world maybe hasn't changed as much as we would like. This may have been an appalling, ridiculous use of power, but what else is new? I guess that's my ultimate walk away from that.
Yeah, and the fact that, if it hasn't changed from the Esther narrative to V in 1970, it hasn't changed. So what makes us think that from 1970 to 2016, it's going to radically change, right? If it hasn't changed in these thousands of years. The reviewer in the New York Times, Jennifer Hay said, Solomon works hard to make this plot turn believable. That she doesn't entirely succeed is almost incidental. Readers who know their Bible will see what she is up to and happily suspend disbelief. And I think she's right there. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, Barbara Tanko.
So, I mean, I actually found it very believable. I don't know if it's my age, I'm not sure, but I found it very believable that he asked to do that. What I found really unbelievable as a woman was how she let him take, for lack of a better word, take advantage of her in the kitchen prior to that, and how she let him, basically throw her down and have sex with him, and she didn't want it. She really didn't. And so the fact that she gets to this point is not surprising to me, because she's let herself be led there until he steps over the line. And then that's when she puts her hands up. That's kind of the way I felt about that. So.
Yeah, great. Abigail Harris had her hand raised.
There we go.
Oh,
Sorry. I also agreed. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I found, yes, I saw what Anna North was doing. I found that I found this very believable in so many ways. And I think there was also the motivation of the senator with the suitcase guy, with that wife. So he had sort of extra, not just political, but a personal reason that motivated him to want his wife to participate in that. And I found that actually really powerful. And we do see today still that people, when they have a personal as well as a political motivation, that they will engage in very sort of dominant behaviors.
And it was very much in character for him. We're not surprised, right? Based on like what Sarah said, some of the, clearly the relationship between the two of them. So Deborah asked an interesting question in the chat. I think if, V is supposed to be Vashti, and Lily is supposed to be Esther, and Alex is supposed to be Ahasuerus, and there's a lot of parallels there, right? Because remember, Vivian Barr, she was the daughter of a senator and the granddaughter of a governor. Like, she was the royalty. Alex, her husband, was a nobody, just like Queen Vashti. But so Deborah's asking, who's Haman in each narrative? And is Haman's name ever mentioned? I don't know. The closest thing I caught on to was Alex's, I don't know what, his sidekick was Humphrey. So I didn't know if that was supposed to be a Haman character, but anyone else? Anyone have thoughts on Deborah's question of who Haman is in each of the narratives? Yeah, Ellen, go for it.
I was going to say, I don't think it ever came up in my thoughts because it never really came up in the book. But I don't know about Adam as a Ahasuerus because there's like this red herring. At one point in the book, when they're talking about Lily being the second wife, and they go back to the first wife, who's like a Lilith. And they sort of, not they sort of, the author kind of writes these 1 or 2 paragraphs that make you think it's an Adam and Eve story. But the point is, it's not an Adam and Eve story. And then that never comes up again. So I really didn't get that passage, except to say, don't think of Adam as the king. I didn't know what else to do with it.
Yeah, I don't know what to do about Adam, because there was a mention that his first wife was Vera, is possibly another Vashti character.
Another V.
Another V, another Vashti, because also the mystery between Adam and his first wife is, did she leave or did he kick her out? So that was the mystery there. So she could have been another Vera character, another Vashti character, but I don't know. Yeah, is Adam supposed to be Ahasuerus, or is just Alex supposed to be Ahasuerus? And I don't know. Haman doesn't. Maybe Haman. We can ask Anna in terms of who is supposed to be Haman. Yeah, Robin.
Yeah, I was just going to say what excuse me, what you mentioned about did she kick him out or did he kick him out was another theme that was repeated again. So that was interesting.
Yeah, that theme of who's telling the story really matters, right? And how the story can change depending on who the narrator is. And that does repeat throughout. Lisa made an interesting comment you'll see in the chat. Arlene.
I did 2 things because I noticed this as soon as I read the book, that the first section, Washington with V, it basically starts out like the Book of Esther. It happened in the days of Nixon. It's exactly from the Book of Esther, #1. And I think, in answer to your question about the whole episode, about, her performing naked and so forth, requested by her husband, I think this was probably Anna's, little hint that this is going to be a story where women's bodies play a major role in one way or another, as we know, because Esther, used it in one way and V in another way, and Lily. And I think this is one of those very complex female issues, like, how do we perceive our body? How do we use our body? And maybe in the 70s, I don't recall, I was, younger, but not that young, but, maybe this was a time of emerging, this was in feminism time, where, and I seem to recall that we talked about, women being objectified and their bodies, used for not the most, upstanding reasons, I suppose. So I think this was probably Anna introducing the whole concept of, what we do with our bodies and how do we get what we want using our bodies.
Yeah, sex as power. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What about Lily? If we do you think it's significant that Lily's narrative is set in 2016? What is significant? And then my other question is, how would Lily have handled distance learning and quarantine in 2020 with her husband and those still 2 children? I don't know if they would have survived, right? I don't know. But what do you think is there a significance, like that she said it in 2016? Could it have been 2010? Could it have been 2018? What do you think Anna Solomon maybe was trying to do? And we can ask her, but maybe if other people have thoughts on the significance of 2016 and kind of Lily and her struggles. Maybe she would have had time to get the laundry done. I don't know though, because the kids would not have been in school. So
no, but she would have wanted to escape, and so that's why she would have laundry.
Yeah, she would have left Adam. Yeah, because Adam would have been working from home, so she would have been like, "I'm going to go downstairs to the laundry room." You're right. She would have had that excuse. And she's also caught between her mom and her friend group. She's got these two different female friend groups that she's torn between. And then she's also got, her mother's expectations of her. So thoughts on Lily and what's going on in her life. Yeah, Kathy.
I mean, I just think based on what Arlene just said and the book itself, I just think that the whole book is a story about how no matter our fighting, no matter our feminism, no matter our whatever, stuff doesn't change for women all that much. We are very much more vocal and all of that, but was Lily's life so much different from Esther's or Vivian? It's like here we are, centuries apart, years apart, decades apart, and what has changed so much? Maybe the only change is that Lily is able to say out loud, this is, I'm not putting up with this anymore or whatever. But I just feel like the whole book was about women and their use of their bodies and their voices. I guess that's the way that my takeaway. It's like, so here we are in 2016, and what is so much different for her than it was for the other two that were part of this book. So that's
also part of her conflict with her mother, right? Because she feels like her mother thinks, you're just a housewife, that you did, her mother, who was a product of second wave feminism, you didn't go out. I do have to say that I couldn't believe it as a Grinnell College grad, if you noticed in my bio, that Lily passes up a job at Grinnell College. I have to ask Anna Solomon if she just randomly picked Grinnell because it's like Iowa, that for them to go to Iowa. But, I think, and I also loved in terms of Lily's two friend groups, right? She's got kind of her conscious raising version group. And I love this description on 73. They tell themselves they don't care about being good homemakers, but they peek around each other's apartments just the same, commenting on how one person seems never to have any toys on her living room floor, or how another has managed to put together non-virtual family photo albums, or how another always manages to buy useful things like that magnetic calendar on her fridge or that cord organizer on her counter. And I think that's so spot on, right? And then when she's at the sewing circle, and it's almost the opposite, right? With what's the woman's name, Kayla or Kyla, and
Kayla.
She's got the baby carrots in the bowl of water, and everything is picture perfect. And Lily is torn between: am I supposed to look down on these women because they're putting baby carrots in water for their children, or am I supposed to admire that about her? So Lily, but I think in terms of 2016, Anna Solomon does say that she did that on purpose. She began writing the Book of E before 2016, but certain elements of the plot came into sharper focus for her during and after the election. In particular, she realized that she needed to set Lily's story right before the election because she wanted to capture a sense of naivete about what was coming. So that she made a conscious decision to set it in 2016. Okay, and then before Anna hops on, I do want to talk about, maybe something that I had the most difficulty with in the book. Esther transforming herself.
Oh, yeah.
In the Esther narrative, right? Ellen's making a face.
I didn't like that.
And I read it twice because maybe on the second time I'll understand it a little more. So yes, I think we are led to believe that she does actually transform herself into this beast. Does anyone have any thoughts? Anyone want to shed some light? Did anyone love that part? Totally get that part? Understand why it was there? What was going on? Yeah, Ellen, what do you think?
I would say I understood it more than the buttons with V. I didn't get the buttons with V. But actually, I think it goes in contradiction to something somebody said earlier about how Esther didn't stand up for herself. I think in the whole book, Esther stands up for herself. And you are thoroughly told over and over that there's magic in the family, the grandmother, the mother. So when she does this, she has the agency, so you don't doubt it. And she does it, so she'll be ugly and he'll throw her out. Doesn't work. Maybe he didn't see it. But I think it's logical from the way the book is written, the way the author set this up, that she does have this trait, but I just didn't like it.
Okay, and we'll ask Anna about that. Carol, and then Jackie, and then Robin.
Oh, there's also the magic with making the bird a real bird out of the bird bones.
Okay.
I mean, there are some of the midrashim that have some kind of magical emphasis that Vashti grew a tail, or that Vashti didn't want to disrobe because she had marks on her body or something. But this, I didn't see this in any of the midrashim that I read, and it still strikes me as very strange. Metaphorically, it could just be, that she's making herself strong to be able to deal with her situation.
Yeah.
And the bird thing, I don't know. The bird thing, that she's trying to transmit her message to them somehow.
Okay, great. Jackie, and then I think Robin, Rita, and Abigail.
Yeah, there's mention of magic throughout the Bible, and you have to think of the time and place when this was set down. So people did believe in magic, but the real magic was that even if Esther did not change at all outwardly, inwardly, that was her transformation from being someone who just accepted what happened to her to say, I'm going to be in charge. That's when she changes the narrative. And one other thing before about the disrobing, when Queen Elizabeth was anointed, there was this whole thing where the bishop was kind of awkward because they actually opened the robe so that the oil can be put on the chest. Vashti was the royalty, not Ahasuerus. So opening her robes was exposing her royalness, her lineage. Anyway.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Robin, Rita, Abigail.
I was just going to say, I haven't finished the book yet, having a hard time, and I had to go back a few times about the beast because I just couldn't get it or whatever. I think last night I finally got through the part again and then got to the bird part. So it was better, but it was hard getting through. That's all.
Yeah, no, it was a little bumpy there. Yeah. Rita, and then Abigail.
Yeah, I thought of Esther, her transformation as kind of becoming this super Wonder Woman, and just having this strength and power to do what she has to. So I saw her as a superhero figure.
Yeah, more like it was like the Marvel comic version. Yeah, Abigail.
I actually thought the magic was sort of racist. Because I mean, it only takes place in the ancient Persian part of the story. And I mean, it's sort of the whole genie, Mid-Eastern, mystical. And I think that bothered me for that reason.
Okay. Valid point. Other thoughts on Esther's transformation? I see that there's some comments in the chat. And the other thing too, like Marilyn's commenting about Esther turning herself into a monster. I mean, also, wasn't it also to make herself, I mean, stronger, but also to be less attractive, right? I mean, was she trying to protect herself that Ahasuerus then would not find her attractive, so he wouldn't take advantage of her? I don't know if that was a reason. Hermione says the bird was a lot like a golem. I think you're right. Okay, other thoughts on the transformation, and then we can actually, kind of get into the Vashti version. I was I like to color code my books. I use these like page flags. I love these page flags. So, Esther was blue and V was pink and Lily was purple. And then it's like we're almost to the end of the story, and we have a fourth narrative gets added in there. I was like, oh wait, I need another color, because we've got the Vashti narrative is inserted there. Was anyone surprised by that, or thoughts on Anna Solomon's decision to let Vashti kind of take over that Esther narrative, and the way that that's the big plot twist in that narrative, right? That this is where Anna Solomon really diverges from what we know from the Megillah. So thoughts on how Anna Solomon reframed this Esther and Vashti story, and if you think it's justified by the biblical text or the Midrash, if you liked it, you didn't like it.
Can we go back for 1 second? I just want to ask a question. We're talking about Esther, transforming into this monster and trying. I mean, I think she was trying to save herself by making her this monster and ugly, whatever. We haven't talked about the minister at all, and how evil he was, and all that stuff. And I think that isn't that like such a big part of both, the Megillah and this book? I mean, isn't that a huge part of the story of Esther? But we're not talking about that. We're only talking about the women. I mean, because I mean, the reason she goes back, she transforms back and not completely, is because he comes in and basically scrapes at her face, which leaves scars, right? So I guess I'm just wondering.
Was that the Haman character? Was that supposed to be the Haman character?
That's kind of why I'm asking. That's exactly why I'm asking. I'm wondering if that's the Haman character, is the minister. So that's kind of why I brought it up, because it was like, to me, he was so vivid in the book with the sexual assault. And because I think the king, though he, we're talking about the king making the choices, but the truth is, it sounds like he doesn't make any choices to me, which I think is the same as the book of Esther. He doesn't really make the choices. He's a puppet. And the truth is, the minister is, carrying all, using the strings. So, it's not really about him. He's not really he's the bad guy in the respect of, because he's soft and he has no voice, but he's not really the bad guy because he's actually not the royalty. So he's probably terrified that he's going to lose his position. And the bad guy is really the minister. And we're not talking about him at all. And so I just was wondering, before we moved on to the Vashti storyline.
Yeah, thoughts on Barbara's comments? Yeah, Rita, do you still have your hand up? Anyone else want reactions to Barbara's comments? Oh, wait, I see some other hands. Oh, Carol.
Oh, I think she's right that the minister is the Haman character. And I think it's also interesting that he isn't named, but Esther is named, but Mordecai is Marduk.
Mm-hmm.
And Marduk is a Babylonian or is a god.
But that was Mordecai's name. That stays true to the book of Esther, right? That was actually Mordecai's name, Marduk.
It's a cognate of Mordecai.
Okay.
But she doesn't use Mordecai. She uses Esther, and Esther the cognate of Esther is Ishtar. But she leaves Esther with that name that we know, but she puts Marduk. He's never Mordecai in the book. He's always Marduk.
Marduk. Yeah, well,
and the Haman character is not Haman, but the minister who's in control of everything and truly evil.
Okay, hold that thought, Carol, because Anna Solomon's in the waiting room. So Jackie's gonna let her in. And we'll introduce her. So let her on in, Jackie.
Did that.
And we can,
And when I find her, I will highlight her.
yeah, spotlight Anna.
And she's in.
I'm here.
Oh,
I know you're here. I'm trying to find.
I know. I realize just my saying it doesn't help you find me.
No, that's okay. We
Because
see
we're
you.
all
And
on this grid.
Jackie will spotlight you. Welcome, Anna, to the Association of Jewish Libraries book discussion of the Book of Eve. I'll just give a brief introduction. We're just in the middle of our discussion. Like I told you not to worry. There was so much to discuss.
Don't interrupt on my behalf.
No, that's okay. No, we're so excited. We have all these questions. We kept saying, well, let's wait. When Anna comes, we'll ask her. Just to give the formal introduction, Anna Solomon is the author of 3 novels, The Book of Bee, Leaving Lucy Pear, and The Little Bride, and a 2-time winner of the Pushcart Prize. And I will say I read both Leaving Lucy Pear and The Little Bride when they came out. So I do recommend them, and they're on that reading list. Anna's short fiction essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Plowshares, One Story, Boston Globe, Tablet, and elsewhere. Anna's recipient of awards from McDowell, Yaddo, Breadloaf, and the Rhode Island State Council for the Arts and the Missouri Review, among others. Her short story, The Lobster Mafia Story, was chosen as Boston's One City, One Story read. Anna is the co-editor with Eleanor Henderson of Labor Day, True Birth Stories by Today's Best Women Writers. And previously, she worked as an award-winning journalist for National Public Radio's Living on Earth. Anna is a graduate of Brown University and the Iowa Writers Workshop and teaches writing at Barnard College, with Warren Wilson's MFA program in creative writing, and the 92nd Street Wise Unterberg Poetry Center. Anna was born and raised in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and lives in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 children. So that is the bio. And actually, just rereading your bio, Anna, one of my questions, I'm a Grinnell graduate. So when you put Grinnell College in that, I was like, what? And I, was curious. And now I'm saying like, oh, you were at the Iowa Writing. So you might have just picked Grinnell randomly, right?
Well, no, one of my close friends went to Grinnell, and I have, I was trying to find a school that kind of, and another friend who had gone to Oberlin had gone through a sort of similar thing to Lily. And so I was kind of just, I don't know, it felt right. So I know a little bit about Grinnell, but.
It worked because I thought that you purposely wanted to pick somewhere that would be like a big move to go from Brooklyn to Grinnell, Iowa would have been a big move for them. So anyways, that's the introduction. When you popped in, Anna, we were just talking about your decision to call Mordecai Marduk and never Mordecai in the narrative. And we were talking about who's the Haman character in all of the different narratives. We talked about all the different Vashtis that appear and Lily as Esther and all these things, but who's the Haman character? So, but maybe if you want to give a little, more of an intro about like why you wrote the book, why you structured it this way, whatever you want to do before we kind of dive in.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll talk a little bit about kind of there's, I can talk endlessly about my process, but I can sort of give the short version a little bit as an intro into kind of how I came to write it. And then we can, whatever questions come up, we can kind of go from there. And I'm sure more of that will come out. And I'm happy to answer anything. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me and for reading the book and embracing it. I really think it started in a way, well, if we really go back, it started sort of with my own childhood and my experience of Purim, which was always as a really fun, but also very confusing holiday. I think that it's a holiday that, it felt so obviously different from all the other holidays. And although I wouldn't have used the word then, it was godless in a way, right? In the same way that the Book of Esther is, one of the only books in the Bible that don't mention God. And the adults were often sort of crazy and maybe drunk, and there was just a sense of like total debauchery in the air. But the thing that kind of always stuck with me was this question about Vashti and sort of like, what made her, she was so clearly the bad one, but I didn't understand why. I just didn't get it. And it didn't seem like anyone had an explanation. And it sort of stuck with me. And then when I was a mother, I was given a book of Esther, a children's version of the Book of Esther, like my character Lily is. And my own kids, like her kids, really loved this book. I read it to them a lot. And I kind of thought, well, maybe this will simplify things for me because it's a book for children and it'll answer my questions. But it didn't at all. It sort of actually, I mean, to its credit, it preserved the Book of Esther very much and all of its plot holes and inconsistencies. So things like, it's like, oh, right. Why does Ahasuerus seem so shocked at the end that Haman had this big plot when, 5 pages earlier, he said, yeah, go ahead, kill all the Jews. Like things just didn't make sense. And to the point of this book, sort of, wait a second, if I really look at this clearly as an adult, Esther seems willingly or not to be a concubine, in a harem. And Vashti seems to be making a choice that's sort of inarguably the virtuous one by saying, no, I will not parade naked in front of you. So what's the deal? Like where are all of these, all the stories that I was told about this story don't seem to match up with the story itself. And so what's going on here, which is a very interesting point of entry, I think, for any creative project endeavor. And so I kind of drove me back to the Book of Esther itself, and things developed from there. But I went to kind of learn just how to even investigate a biblical text in a real way and the commentaries that grow out of it. And the story grew from there.
Well, the librarians in the room are dying to know which Book of Esther, children's book, were you referring to?
People keep asking me this, and I keep, this I've been doing, I've never had a Purim season before, but this year, because of this book, I'm having like a Purim season. So I'm going to look right as we're talking. I keep forgetting between my events to look this up, and I'm going to find it for you because it's wonderful. It's beautifully illustrated. And I couldn't find it.
Did you get it from PJ Library?
I don't think so, because this one is hardcover. I thought it would be easier to find. Everybody in the room is like, there are 100. I'll find it. I'll email you with it.
The librarians will find it for you. We'll, because you'll know the cover.
Beautifully illustrated, and it was definitely hardcover. And oh, here it is. Okay, I found it. It's called The Story of Esther, a Purim Tale. And it's retold by Eric A. Kimmel, illustrated by Jill Weber, W-E-B-E-R.
Yeah, we know which one. Yep. Okay, perfect. Because actually, I do want to point out that, and if anyone hasn't seen it yet, there is a new, if anyone has seen this, Esther Didn't Dream of Being Queen by Alison Ofanansky came out this year. It has a little different twist. And then there's Vashti and her comfy pants.
Yes, by Leah Berkowitz, the rabbi. Yeah, I've been getting, it's kind of amazing. And both of them seem to have, people have been sending me sort of pictures from within and of the notes at the end in particular. I need to get my hands on the books, but it seems like they're really getting at some questions that these kinds of books haven't gotten at before. So I was glad to see that.
Yeah. So what about your choices in naming your characters and your decision when to stay true to the Megillah and when to veer off course?
Yeah, I think, well, with the names, I mean, a lot of it's playful. I don't have particular rules about it, but I did decide to call Esther Esther, which itself is a choice because I didn't call her Hadassah. And then to allow the other characters to have their own names. I mean, Marduk was a very close to Mordecai, but Persian and also the name of a god. And I kind of was playing with his sense of, I think that there was a lot behind that it's probably, I just chose, I didn't want to name him, I didn't want to give him the name that we know him by. And in the same way, I leave the minister unnamed in that section, but I do have these H's, as people were probably, as your discussion was probably picking up on in the other parts, like Hump, who's the chief of staff for Alexander Kent, and then Hal, in a sense, in the contemporary story, although he certainly isn't evil. I did at some point have a kind of whole subplot that developed that I wound up taking out that was a little more, little darker than what we wound up with Hal, but he was sort of just kind of a lingering a kind of sidekick. And I think that, that sort of evolves. I think that one of the things that I came to understand in my readings of both the Book of Esther and then the commentary on it was the way in which more and more, like how impotent King Ahasuerus was and how strong and powerful and in charge Haman was. And so I wanted to kind of play with that. And what was the other question? Oh, in terms of staying close and going away. I mean, I allowed myself to, I was thinking about this yesterday, you know, I allowed myself to read and kind of play and read and play and try to respond to lines that provoked me in some way. But I think that where I felt I was staying true, to me at least, was to the sort of the characters, the people that seem to be in the book of Esther. That's arguable, of course, because and all of this is arguable. But you know, for instance, the decision around Mordecai being attracted to Esther, for instance, Marduk being attracted to Esther. In the Greek version of the book of Esther, there is and I forget the exact word, but in the word that in Hebrew is read as daughter, like he came and she was in his house as his daughter, is read as his wife. So I was interested in that. And so I allowed that to develop, right? So, and then in other places, there were other, a lot of the time it grew out of either the text itself or a given interpretation or debate about the text. And I kind of used that to push my story forward, if that makes sense.
And then why not just write the Esther Vashti story like the Red Tent and like the biblical fiction?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, I honestly pretty briefly about it because first of all, on just on an artistic, on a level of me as a writer, aesthetically, I didn't want to do it. And it wasn't not for any reason. I love those books, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I kept thinking I should just do it like this, like just keep it all in ancient Persia. And I was like, I don't want to spend 3 or 4 years doing that. And you do have to really want to write a book because you spend a lot of time there. But more than just the aesthetic choice, which is important for me, I think it was that I realized pretty soon that what I was really interested in was not just about telling this story, but about creating a book that itself was about storytelling and about the ways that stories get both, you know, that get passed on and get misread and the way that they shape us over generations and over centuries and really over millennia. And so that I think became it became very important to the book. And so the way that I envisioned it shifted, and I knew that I wanted to allow us to kind of see both, you know, how much has not changed, and also the way in which the stories that were told, like for Lily, for instance, and the way in which so Ruth has told her all these stories about her life, which are true, but not full, right? And they've had what Ruth intends them to have a fully empowering effect on Lily. And they have in some ways, but then in other ways, they've actually been very complicated and detrimental and have created all this confusion and shame in her. And so like that dynamic, for instance, is a type of dynamic I really wanted to explore in the book. And I knew I didn't feel like I could do that within ancient Persia. I wanted to expand it and explore it. I mean, explode it is what I meant to say.
The other thing we talked about that people struggled with was the Esther's transformation.
In her magical transformation.
Yeah.
I wanted, so I think that, you know, for me, throughout the book, I am wrestling with and engaged with questions of women's power, and that takes many, many forms, but certainly one aspect of women's power that I'm examining throughout the book is women's power as it resides in their bodies, and both how women use that power, reject that power, take advantage of that power, are victimized by that power. Like there's just kind of the complexity of that power. And so allowing, I think, what seemed to me to be a desire on Esther's part, allowing her to sort of manifest that desire and see what she could do with it, like to obviate her own beauty, right? In this circumstance, to say like, I'm going to try to escape by escaping my own desirability, seemed to be a way of exploring and kind of taking further the same questions I was asking throughout the book in all 3 sections. And in terms of kind of harnessing and playing with the idea of the magical power, for me, because I wondered like, well, what am I doing here? And is there not is there precedent, but is there sort of, is there a call for this in our history? I was surprised and excited to learn that that there really was a very strong tradition of practical magic among Jewish people going back to ancient times. And, you know, I was sort of much more familiar with Jewish mysticism, but I didn't realize that this strong belief in practical magic, the ability to have, you know, do spells, to make people fall in love with other people, to transform one thing into another, to bring things to life, was actually was strong. And so that gave me permission to play further with that.
Great. Okay, well, I want to let some people, let me see if there were some questions in the chat or if people wanted to jump on in. Ellen Cole, did you want to ask your question about the hours? Oh, unmute, Ellen.
Hi, good morning, Anna. Thank you, Rachel. Anna, I really love the hours. So when you cited it, I pulled it off the shelf. And the most striking thing to me is that the three women in the three parts are definitely divided into the author, the author's character, and the reader. And I'm wondering how you would transfer that to your women characters in the Book of V.
When you say the reader, you mean like one of the characters is
Mrs. Brown is the reader, Mrs. Wilcox is the author, Mrs. Dalloway is the character.
Yeah, it was, and as you saw, I mean, that book was, I don't know that I would have had the courage to write this book without the hours, because it gave me a way to envision structurally how I might have one original book and the story of its creation in a sense. Another story in which a woman was sort of living out that earlier story, in this case, my Vivian Barr. And then another one in which someone is sort of reckoning with and engaged with that story. So Lily, while she isn't, I mean, she is reading it. So she's reading the book to her kids, and then she sort of becomes the writer in a sense toward the end in her, as she works with the spiel. So that's the way that I envisioned that these characters, but I wasn't setting out to create a book that kind of mirrored the hours. I was using the those sort of dynamics as inspiration, if that makes sense. So it's not a neat kind of corollary, but I do very much. But that was the idea, and then also, of course, I'm assuming, I won't spoil it for those who might not have finished it, but then also allowing for the woman who's kind of living out the story to intersect with the one who's engaged in its reading. So in some ways, I guess if you do look at it as a corollary, like you're asking, then maybe those latter two parts are flipped in a sense, if that makes sense, because because in the hours, it's the woman in the middle who's reading it, whereas my woman in the middle is the one living it out, if that makes sense. Right. She's not, right, because Vivian Barr in 1973 knows nothing of the Book of Esther, I guess is what I mean. So there are certainly differences.
Any other questions? Anna, someone emailed in a question, and this kind of relates too with, you know, those of us that follow Jewish fiction and you know, for me, you know, our antennas always perk up when a book that appears to be so explicitly Jewish, you know, is on the radar of Good Morning America, like your book is. So in terms of like, when you were writing it, were you thinking this was going to be a, you know, sisterhood synagogue book club selection? Like, were you writing it for this audience on this Zoom, or were you writing it, did you think it had more widespread appeal to like the Good Morning America, Entertainment Weekly, People Magazine, or were you surprised by that? Like, you know, my question is, do you think people have to understand the story of Esther and Vashti to understand the Book of V?
Well, so first I will just make clear that I never write with any hopes that anything like that will happen, because that would be crazy. But I was really grateful that it did. But I think I very much write from a place, and with this book, it was no different. I don't know that I was conscious of it at different points, but I definitely wanted this to be a book that anyone could read, engage in, and like really get involved with, whether or not they knew anything about the Book of Esther, cared about the Book of Esther, etc. Like, I wanted it to feel so that it wasn't meant to be not for Jewish people, right? But it was meant to be, I meant it to be very inclusive and very independent of that relationship. And then to have all these other layers of relationship for those people who do have that background and who are interested. So in that way, I mean, again, it wasn't like I was like, so what I really want is Good Morning America, because again, that's just like, as a writer, that would be nuts to think in that way. But I was so, and I was surprised. Of course, I was shocked, just because it's like a shocking, exciting thing to have that kind of popular recognition and kind of embrace by them and people and all of that, like you were saying. But I wasn't, it did affirm for me that I had succeeded in, expanding the scope of the story and allowing for it to be accessible. I mean, one thing early on that was very gratifying to me in that way is that my editor, when she bought the book, she still is, not just when she bought the book, but she's not Jewish. And she really didn't know the Book of Esther, and she loved the book. And so, and my agent is Jewish. And so, I said to, I loved that my editor had the reaction she did to the book, even though she didn't know the story. Because I felt like I could count on people who did love the Book of Esther to be interested in the book. Whether or not they liked it or not was another question, right? But to know that she, as a woman who, just has no relationship to it, felt like it really spoke to her was wonderful.
Great. And the question the person asked was like, if your husband had read it, had read the book, and even, I don't know, I think I saw one man on the call. I don't know how many men we have. I do have a couple of men when I discuss this with my book group, and have you been surprised, or what is the reaction in terms of male readers?
Yeah, I mean, so my husband read the book after it was in galleys. This book was for reasons that might be clear, that it felt, like I really needed to make this book my own and claim it sort of before hearing from him. I guess it'd be one way to say it. Not because it's about him, but it's like it's a strongly feminist book, and sort of unapologetically so. And it certainly comes closer to our lives in a way than my previous books have. And I was, I wanted to both be upfront about that, but also protective of that. And I do, look, most readers of fiction, unfortunately, are women, like any book. But B, yeah, I mean, I've been really glad when men have been in the audience. They're certainly the minority in a big way. And I've had a variety of responses from them. But I think what's been really, again, gratifying is to hear from men who feel like they have sort of been able, in a way that they hadn't before, to understand certain women in their life. And, I think that certainly wasn't what I set out to do. It wasn't like I'm going to change the way that men see. This book, I think, is probably, I don't think about it in this way, but is for women as much as, like, that's okay with me. I mean, that's another thing just to say is I think I've always had this part of me is like, well, I don't want to be put into this women's fiction little box, but it's also like, hey, women are great. If women want to read my books, great. Let's not dismiss it for that either. You know what I mean? And yeah, and it is a book. The other piece of it that I've come through these events and through talking about the book to realize too is when people ask, like, well, why aren't the men more fully developed, more three-dimensional? And I do think, like, as we get closer to the present, like, I think Adam, I hope, comes across in a three-dimensional way. But it's also, I've started to realize, like, it's okay. This book is about women, and that's okay. Like, it's not, there have been a lot of books that are in which women's roles mostly are to serve as helping the male characters develop and to reflect them and play all these, and that may be the case for this book. And I think that that's okay in the opposite direction.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. Yeah, look at who's coming. I mean, we've got 62. We had over 70 at one point on the Zoom. So let's not dismiss it. And I think even if your book had just been a sisterhood book club, synagogue book group, that's great too. We shouldn't dismiss that audience either.
This is true.
But that's great. There was a couple. I think we are running out of time, but maybe there was one question here in the chat about Rosemary/Ruth's conversion, and was that planned? Like, did you set? And then maybe that answers like a general, like, how much of the book do you plan out before you start writing?
Right. Well, so I'll speak to the conversion and then the question of sort of planning. Yeah, I knew all along, or I can never say what I knew at the beginning because it changes so much. But I from an early point, I understood that that Ruth had sort of come from Rosemary. And I think I'm very interested in the ways in which for some people, not always in a religious sense, that when we go through a very important and difficult transformation in our life and in our inner life, that it's important in some way to express it externally. And I think that people do that, and she does it also by changing her name. And part of that also is by converting. And the other thing I was interested in is, I've been lucky enough to have a lot of friends who have converted to Judaism, and I'm always struck by how sort of fully they embrace it. In some ways, I think more so than some of us who were born Jewish, and how much they know also compared to me, for instance. I'll just speaking for myself. And so I was interested in playing with that as well. And in terms of the planning, this book, as you might imagine, was a very tricky one and very important to have. I felt a lot of the time kind of like an architect putting together these pieces, and I work with index cards a lot. And with this book, it was like each part. So, exile and then wandering. Exile I would start with, and each index card represented a scene, and I would have it up on the wall, and I had them color coded by time. And I would arrange them to see, like, well, what if I put this here and then this here, and what happens on an informational level, on an emotional level, if these are rearranged. And then I would have sort of the gestures and themes that run through the book, like humming and sewing and drinking and other things. I would have those sort of highlighted, and then I could get visually a sense of what I was creating and whether it was coming together. And there were, but it's, for me, writing a novel is always a kind of act of doing that big picture work. But then when I'm drafting, when I'm in the book, I have to just forget about it and be in the scene and be with the characters. And then I have to step back again. And I think if there's anything I get better at, which is hard to say because every book is a new challenge, it's knowing when to kind of shift roles. So, like, oh, it's time to be the analytic editor, architect self now, and step away and look at what I've done. And, oh, it's time to put that aside. Yeah.
Great. One last, I will say too, I use these page flags, and I did color code the.
Oh my goodness. That's the Book of V. Oh my, I love
yeah.
that. Will you send me
yes.
a picture of that, please?
Yes, Esther was blue and V was purple and Lily was pink. And
wow.
I started running out of and then I had to get another color when Vashti came in. I was like, oh, I need another color. Marilyn had a question in the chat, and maybe about your previous book. So you want to give like a brief commercial? Some of us, I had already been familiar with your work, but maybe people who aren't familiar and they love the Book of V and now want to go back.
Sure.
Give a commercial
always,
and
of course.
What we should look for next from you.
Yeah, and also I'll say before, since we're wrapping up, to give people time, if anyone wants to, I send an email maybe once every 3 years when I have a book come out, so it wouldn't be a lot. But if you want to know when my next book comes out, please, either you can put your name in the chat, or if you're not comfortable doing that, I can put my, I'm just going to put my website in, and if you go to my website and you scroll to the bottom, there's a little window. It's very easy. And you can put your email in there. It's really just, to me, it's all very private. And it lets me just stay in touch. So yes, Leaving Lucy Pear, which was my last book, is set in where Rosemary lives and where Vivian Barr goes, which is where I grew up, Gloucester, Massachusetts. And it's set in the 1920s and is about one woman who has abandoned her baby and the other woman who has raised it, and the way in which they are brought back together. And then my first book, The Little Bride, is set in the 1880s, and it begins in Ukraine with a mail order bride named Minna Losk, who imagines that she's going to America, and she imagines that she'll be in like New York or Chicago or another place she's heard of, and winds up in South Dakota on a farm as part of this. There was a movement called Am Olam, a Jewish pioneer movement that I had never known about until I started researching that book. Married to quite a bit older man and winds up with stepsons of her own who are her age, and things sort of proceed and get very wild from there. So those are the first two. And then I'm still very much at the beginning. You might imagine this last year has not been the most productive, easy year to work as someone with children. And with this book coming out, which has taken a lot of work, but been an amazing experience. But I am slowly getting into and making progress on a book that is sort of inspired by, or is inspired by the Sarah Hagar Abraham triangle, but set fully in contemporary times. So sort of a contemporary surrogacy story. It may be that a year from now it will turn out it didn't work and there will be a whole other book that you see in a few years, but I'm hoping, I'm enjoying it. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for taking time out of your busy day to join us. And thank you for writing this wonderful book that was such a perfect read for, the Purim season. We don't get a lot of those. So thank you for writing that book. And it was really a great discussion. To those of you that joined in, we didn't, there was so much to talk. I think we could talk for several more hours. There are several I got my questions from some reading guides. One, I think, Anna, one is on your website, right?
Yeah.
The one that's the online book club kit. I'll try to stick that in the chat.
And there's also, let me just,
and Hadassah had one too, right?
Yes. And you know what, actually, I'm going to put in the chat. So there's in the Bay Area, Jewish Learning Works has chosen the book for it's this One Bay, One Book program. And they have put together the best discussion resource guide where they bring together all these different discussion guides, reviews, and interviews. So let me, I've just found it's like better than anything I've put together. So I thought I would just share it here.
Great. Because I think several people on the call are doing the Book of V with their book clubs in the coming week. So it's always nice. Okay, great. So Anna put that in the chat.
It's right there.
And I know that the Hadassah talk you gave is you can watch the video online. So if you Google Anna Solomon Hadassah, you'll find her video.
That should be on my website too, I'm pretty sure.
And it's on your website. There's a lot of great information on Anna's website and on the internet. So definitely a great book club book. So if anyone is looking for a book for their book club, you've got all the resources to turn this into an instant success as a book club reading. So Cathy, Jackie, any other announcements from AJL?
No, keep an eye, if you're a member, keep an eye on your inbox because we have roundtables and more AJL Presents coming up. And if you're not a member, please join.
Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you, Anna.
And thank you, Anna, for your beautiful book, and thank you for your time.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate all your work, all of you who bring books to readers. It's really, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Great. You want to stop the recording, Jackie?
I will stop.